Hold still, I commanded. My voice wasn't a request. It was a calibration setting, as precise and unyielding as a scalpel currently hovering millimeters from the king's chest. The air in the containment unit smelled like ozone, burnt sugar, and the copper tang of fresh blood. A cocktail of violence that usually makes lesser specialists vomit. I didn't flinch. I just adjusted the magnification on my loops. King Valerius looked up at me. He was bleeding sluggishly from a jagged, black-rimmed wound in his pectoral muscle, his skin fever-hot and slick with sweat. By all medical logic, he should have been in shock. Instead, he looked like a man enjoying a very dangerous game. His golden eyes locked onto mine, dilated with pain and something far more volatile. "Make me," he murmured. The vibration of his deep baritone threatened to dislodge the void shard inching toward his heart. I didn't panic. Panic is for amateurs who don't charge a retainer fee that rivals the GDP of a small country. I'm Dr. Nesberry, and I'm the only extraction specialist in the hemisphere who understands that an Alpha King isn't the patient. He's a biological weapon that needs to be disarmed. "If you move again," I said, my voice dropping to that cool, sultry register that I reserve for diffident bombs and difficult men, "I'm going to triple my hourly rate." But to understand why I was currently straddling the most powerful predator on the continent while holding a piece of void glass with surgical forceps, we have to go back to the moment I landed. I don't typically take live patients. The living are messy variables. They have opinions, irrational fears, and a tendency to scream when you cut them open without general anesthesia. I prefer forensics or high-stakes artifact retrieval, objects that understand the value of silence. Dead bodies don't try to flirt with you while you're dissecting their neural pathways. But when the Royal Guard calls you on a quantum-encrypted line at 3 a.m, you make an exception. The target was a void shard, a nasty piece of magical shrapnel from the recent border skirmishes. It isn't just metal. It's a burrowing parasite constructed from solidified shadow and malice. It acts like a compass needle seeking magnetic north, only north is the source of the victim's magical core. Put it in a human, it kills them in an hour. Put it in an Alpha King with a magical signature like a supernova, and you have a nuclear reactor in meltdown. My arrival at the Iron Citadel was theatrical, to say the least. The fortress was in full lockdown. Red emergency strobes bathed the ancient stone walls in the color of arterial spray, pulsing in a rhythm that was designed to induce anxiety. It was working. The outer bailey was filled with panicked advisors running around like headless chickens, clutching data pads and weeping about the line of succession. I ignored them. I stepped out of the transport, my magnetic levitation medical case floating obediently beside my hip, and walked straight into a wall of aggressive beta wolves. They were posturing, chests puffed out, trying to secure the perimeter against a woman in a silk blouse, tailored slacks, and nitrile gloves. "Step aside," I said, not slowing my pace. My heels clicked against the stone floor, a metronome of order in their chaos. "The king is unstable," the lead lieutenant barked, blocking my path with a spear that looked heavy, decorative, and entirely inefficient. "No one enters the sanctum. It's a blast zone, ma'am." I stopped then. I didn't look at his face. I looked at the biometric scanner on his wrist. "Your cortisol levels are spiking, Lieutenant. You're terrified. And judging by the tremors vibrating through the floorboards, your king is currently leaking enough magical radiation to sterilize this entire wing. Do you want to be the one to explain to the High Council why you delayed the only person capable of defusing him?" He hesitated, his eyes darting from my ID badge to the floating case of instruments. That hesitation was an admission of incompetence. "I didn't think so," I said smoothly. "My protocol is simple. I enter, I extract, I bill you. If you keep me standing here, the extraction becomes an autopsy. Do the math." I pushed past him, my shoulder brushing his tactical vest. The air grew heavier the deeper I went into the stronghold. It wasn't just gravity. It was the pressure of an alpha in distress. Most people find it suffocating, a physical weight that presses the air from their lungs. I find it informative. I pulled up the diagnostics on my HUD glasses, scrolling through the remote telemetry I'd hacked into during the flight. Heart rate, critical. Toxicity, rising exponentially. He was dying, but he was doing it with enough stubbornness to level the building. The panic in the hallway was just noise. The data was the signal. I filtered out the weeping advisors and the shouting guards, focusing entirely on the rhythm of the biological disaster waiting for me. I reached the entrance to the private sanctum. The reinforced steel door was warm to the touch, vibrating with the kinetic energy contained inside. I checked the seal on my case, smoothed the front of my coat, and keyed the override code. The door hissed open, and the sterile silence of the hallway was instantly swallowed by the heavy, electric hum of the Predator's den. I wasn't walking into a hospital room. I was walking into a cage match. I expected a patient in a high-tech medical stasis pod, perhaps hooked up to a life support algorithm that was doing its best to scrub the magical radiation from his blood. I expected a sterile environment where I could dictate the terms of engagement. What I found was a war room that smelled like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. King Valerius wasn't horizontal. He was standing over a massive, glowing tactical table, his hands braced against the holographic projection of the borderlands. He had discarded his jacket and shirt, likely because the heat radiating from his skin was unbearable. His torso was a landscape of lean, corded muscle and old scars. But my eyes went instantly to the fresh trauma. The void shard had entered just below the left clavicle. It wasn't just a wound, it was an invasion. Black, spider-webbing veins pulsed out from the entry point, tracing the path of his lymphatic system, seeking the heavy thump of his heart. He was bleeding onto the map. A single dark drop fell from his chest and hissed as it hit the light projection, sizzling like bacon in a pan. "Move the 3rd Battalion to the ridge," Valerius growled, his voice rough with the kind of pain that shreds vocal cords. "If they breach the perimeter, we lose the eastern flank." "Sire," a trembling general whispered, clutching a datapad like a shield. "The medical team insists—" "The medical team is dismissed," Valerius snapped. He didn't look up. He adjusted a troop line on the map, his hand shaking with a tremor that was microscopic to them, but glaringly obvious to me. "And if you mention the infirmary again, General, I will have you reassigned to sanitation." "Actually," I said, stepping out of the shadows and into the blue glow of the map, "the General is right, but his delivery is terrible." Valerius froze. The entire room went silent. The air pressure dropped so sharply my ears popped. The king slowly lifted his head. His face was pale, the skin tight over his cheekbones, beads of sweat caught in the dark stubble along his jaw. But his eyes, gold, predatory, and currently blown wide with adrenaline, locked onto me with the weight of a physical blow. "Who let a civilian into the war room?" he asked. It wasn't a question. It was a threat. "I let myself in," I replied, setting my case down on a side table with a deliberate, heavy thud. "And I'm clearing the room. Gentlemen, get out. Unless you have a medical degree or a death wish, you are currently obstructing my workflow." The advisors looked at the king, terrified to move. Valerius looked at me, his lip curling in a snarl that showed a flash of lengthened canine. "Stay," he commanded the room. Then to me, "You have 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't throw you out a window." Inefficient, I noted, closing the distance between us. I walked right up to the edge of the tactical table, invading his personal space. I could feel the heat radiating from him in waves, a fever of at least 104 degrees. Throwing me would require physical exertion that would accelerate the shard's migration by approximately 3 millimeters. You'd kill yourself just to make a point. Which, admittedly, seems to be your management style. He stared at me, the growl dying in his throat, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. I didn't give him time to recover. I reached out, my hand hovering over the console of the tactical map. "You are fighting a war on a map while losing the war in your bloodstream," I said softly. "Let's prioritize." I yanked the power cord. The hologram died. The room plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the emergency strobes from the hallway. The silence was absolute. The generals looked like they were waiting for lightning to strike me dead. Valerius looked down at the blank table, then slowly back up to me. He didn't strike. He didn't roar. He huffed a laugh, a dark, wet sound. "You are bold," he murmured, leaning forward until his face was inches from mine. Or stupid. Expensive, I corrected, holding his gaze. And observant. You're favoring your left side. Your pupil response is sluggish, indicating the neurotoxin has reached your optic nerve. You're losing peripheral vision, which means you're useless as a commander right now anyway. You aren't strategizing, Your Majesty. You're hallucinating victory while you bleed to death. I turned to the room, my voice snapping like a whip. Out. Now. This time, they didn't wait for his permission. The doors hissed shut, leaving us alone in the dim emergency light. Valerius watched them go, then turned his focus back to me. The anger was gone, replaced by a simmering, feverish curiosity. He leaned back against the edge of the dead map table, crossing his arms over his chest, a movement that made him wince. Fine, he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. You have the floor, Doctor. Extract the shard. Good, I said, reaching for my case. Lie down. I need to administer a general anesthetic. No. I paused, a scalpel already in my hand. Excuse me? No drugs, Valerius said, his eyes hard. The shard reacts to magic, but the enemy reacts to weakness. If I go under, the bond with my pack severs. They will know I am vulnerable. I stay awake. That is biologically impossible, I countered, stepping into his space again. I am going to cut into your chest wall. The pain alone will cause cardiac arrest. He leaned in, the smell of rain and violence overwhelming my senses. He smirked, a dangerous, jagged expression. Then you better be fast, he whispered. Do it here. Do it now. And don't expect me to make it easy. You are conflating bravery with suicide, I said, snapping the latches of my case with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The void shard isn't just shrapnel, Valerius. It is a magi-parasitic construct. It doesn't just sit in your chest. It feeds. It consumes energy spikes. Pain causes adrenaline. Adrenaline causes magical flares. If I cut into you while you are fully conscious, your body's natural defense mechanism will essentially feed the thing that is currently killing you. You won't just be in pain. You will be accelerating the necrosis by a factor of 10. He didn't blink. He didn't even look at the terrifying array of instruments I was laying out on the side table. And if I go under, my mental shields drop. The connection to the border wards dissolves. The enemy isn't just at the gate. They are the gate. If I sleep, the barrier falls and thousands die. That is the variable you are ignoring. There it was, the immovable object meeting the unstoppable force. I looked at the monitors I had reconnected to my tablet. His logic was sound, tactically. Medically, it was a disaster. But I am not paid to argue with monarchs about the geopolitical consequences of their naps. I am paid to fix them. Compromise, I said, my voice clipping with the sharp edge of professional frustration. Local anesthetic only. I block the nerve cluster around the wound. You stay conscious, you keep your shields up. But you will feel the pressure. You will feel the extraction. And if you flinch, you might sever your own subclavian artery. I don't flinch, he said. We'll see. I pointed to the massive mahogany desk behind him. It was covered in maps, tactical markers, and ancient scrolls. Clear it. That is your operating table. He didn't hesitate. He swept the entire surface clean with one powerful sweep of his arm, sending priceless artifacts and hollow projectors crashing to the stone floor. He didn't look at the destruction. He looked at me, a challenge burning in those golden eyes. Hop up, I ordered. He sat on the edge of the desk, his legs spread, looking less like a patient and more like a monarch on a throne of violence. The height difference was negligible now. Standing between his knees, I was eye level with the disaster in his chest. The proximity was a tactical error on my part. The heat radiating from him was intense, a physical wave of fever and raw, uncontainable power. The vest, I said, keeping my eyes on his face. And the shirt. Take them off. He paused. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a static that made the fine hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't just magic. It was the specific, heavy gravity of an alpha testing his boundaries. Slowly, deliberately, his hands went to the tactical buckles of his Kevlar vest. Click. The sound was deafening. He undid the Velcro straps with agonizing slowness, his eyes never leaving my face. He was daring me to look away, to blush, to show any sign that I was a woman standing in front of a half-naked king. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I prepped a syringe, tapping the glass barrel to clear the air bubbles. "Today, Your Majesty." He smirked, a dark, knowing expression, and shed the heavy vest. It hit the floor with a thud. Then his hands went to the buttons of his dress shirt. It was ruined, soaked in blood and sweat, clinging to his skin like a shroud. He undid the top button, then the second. The fabric peeled away from his skin with a wet sound. "You're enjoying this," I noted dryly, testing the sharpness of a scalpel against my thumbnail. "I'm following doctor's orders," he countered, his voice a low purr that vibrated through the floor. "Unless you'd prefer to do it for me?" "I prefer my patients to be self-sufficient." He shrugged the shirt off his shoulders. It pooled at his waist. The sight was clinically fascinating and objectively devastating. His torso was a map of violence, old scars, silver burns, bite marks from challenges won. But the void shard was the centerpiece. It was a jagged splinter of absolute darkness, pulsating with a sick violet rhythm. The skin around it was angry and black, the veins standing out like ropes. I stepped in close. I had to. To work on the wound, I had to stand between his knees, invading his personal space in a way that would get anyone else killed. "Arms back," I commanded. "Lean on your hands." He complied, leaning back, his chest thrust forward. The position stretched the skin over his ribs, highlighting the definition of his serratus anterior. It also put his face dangerously close to my neck. "You smell like antiseptic," he murmured, inhaling deeply. "And you smell like necrotic tissue and bad decisions," I replied, swabbing the area with iodine. The cold liquid made his muscles jump, a ripple of tension that traveled down his abdomen. "Hold still," I warned, positioning the needle. "I'm inserting the block. This is going to burn." "Make it count," he gritted out. I didn't hesitate. I drove the needle into the nerve cluster. He didn't scream. He didn't even grunt. But his hands gripped the edge of the mahogany desk so hard I heard the wood groan. His knuckles went white. His eyes squeezed shut, and for a second, the mask slipped. He wasn't just a king. He was a man in agony, holding on to sanity by a thread. I withdrew the needle. "Breathe, Valerius. If you pass out, I'm billing you for the resuscitation." He opened his eyes. The gold was brighter now, fueled by the pain. "I'm awake," he rasped. "Proceed." "We haven't even started the extraction," I said, picking up the scalpel. "That was just the appetizer. Now I have to cut." I snapped a fresh pair of nitrile gloves onto my hands. The sound was sharp, a punctuation mark in the heavy silence of the room. Valerius watched me, his eyes tracking the movement with a lazy, predatory focus that was entirely at odds with the fact that he was currently dying. "You're enjoying the view," I noted, not looking up as I arranged the hemostats on the edge of the desk. "I'm assessing the threat," he corrected, though the corner of his mouth twitched. "You have excellent posture for an assassin." "I'm a surgeon, Valerius. Assassins are cheaper." I stepped back into his space. The heat radiating off him was palpable, a physical wall of fever that hit me the moment I crossed the threshold of his knees. It was like standing next to an open furnace door. My own body temperature seemed to drop in response, a defensive calibration against his overwhelming thermal output. I placed my left hand flat against his sternum to stabilize the skin. The contrast was violent. My gloved fingers were cool, clinical, and synthetic. His skin was burning, damp with sweat, and hard as armor plate. Beneath my palm, his heart wasn't just beating, it was rioting. The rhythm was fast, erratic, a frantic drum solo played by a musician who knew the venue was about to burn down. He hissed at the contact, his abdominal muscles clenching tight enough to bounce a quarter. "Cold," he gritted out, his head falling back slightly, exposing the vulnerable column of his throat. "You're running at 105 degrees, I replied, my voice detached, analyzing the data while ignoring the way his breath hitched. "Everything feels cold to you right now. Try not to confuse hypothermia with my personality." He laughed, a rough, wet sound that turned into a grimace as the movement pulled at the wound. "Your personality is Efficiently cruel, doctor. Most healers offer comfort. You offer data points and insults. Comfort is a placebo, I said, picking up the scalpel. I locked eyes with him. Comfort tells you it's going to be okay when it might not be. I don't lie to my clients. This is going to hurt. The shard has fused with the fascia of your pectoral muscle. I have to separate it before I can extract it. If I offered you a lollipop and a pat on the head, I'd be insulting your intelligence. And my pain tolerance? He challenged, gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned the color of bone. Impressive, I admitted, lowering the blade. Bordering on pathological. But your self-preservation instinct is non-existent. A rational biological organism would have passed out 10 minutes ago to conserve energy. You're staying awake out of spite. Spite is a powerful fuel source, he murmured. He leaned forward, just an inch, closing the already non-existent distance between us. And I don't like missing the show. Then don't blink. I stopped talking. The banter was a distraction, a way to keep his adrenaline manageable. But now the window was closing. The void shard was pulsating faster, sensing the threat of the steel in my hand. The black veins around the entry wound were writhing under the skin like trapped worms. I tightened my grip on the scalpel. Deep breath. Hold it. He inhaled. His chest expanded, pressing against my hand. He held it. I cut. The blade sliced through the tough outer layer of skin and into the inflamed muscle beneath. It wasn't a clean cut. The magic in his blood reacted to the metal, sizzling and popping like hot grease. Smoke, acrid and purple, curled up from the incision, stinging my eyes. Valerius didn't scream. He didn't roar. He made a sound that was infinitely worse, a low, guttural vibration that started in his chest and transferred directly into my body through the point of contact. It was the sound of a wolf being flayed alive, suppressed by an iron will. His body jerked violently, a reflex he couldn't control. His hands crushed the edge of the desk, splintering the expensive mahogany. "Don't move," I barked, pressing my weight down on his shoulder to pin him. "I have to widen the incision. If you thrash, I nick the artery." "Get it out," he choked. His teeth clenched so hard I worried they would shatter. Sweat poured off him now, soaking the waistband of his trousers. "I'm trying," I said, my voice losing its cool veneer for just a fraction of a second. "But it's fighting me." And it was. The shard wasn't just sitting there. It was retreating. As I probed the wound, the jagged glass seemed to dig deeper, burrowing toward the heat of his lung like a parasite seeking shelter. I had to go deeper. I had to hurt him more. I adjusted my grip on the retractor. "I need more access. I'm going to have to clamp the muscle back." Valerius looked up at me. His eyes were no longer golden. They were entirely black, the pupil blown wide by agony and the encroaching void magic. He looked feral, dangerous. A monster I was currently torturing in the name of medicine. "Do it," he snarled, the command wet with blood. The forceps slid into the incision, and it felt like dipping my hand into a live electrical socket. The void shard wasn't just foreign matter. It was a localized event horizon. It pushed back against the steel instruments, a magnetic repulsion that tried to force my hand away from his heart. "It's fighting the extraction," I muttered, sweat prickling along my own hairline now. "The magical signature is adapting to the metal. I have to go manual." "Manual?" Valerius choked out. "I have to clamp it. Hard." I didn't wait for permission. I squeezed the hemostats. The locking mechanism clicked. Snap. Valerius didn't just flinch this time. He convulsed. His back arched off the desk, a bow drawn taut by pure agony. The mahogany under his left hand exploded. Not cracked, exploded. Splinters of expensive wood rained down onto the stone floor, scattering like shrapnel. "Stay down," I shouted, abandoning the clinical detachment I prized so highly. I threw my upper body weight onto his good shoulder, pinning him against the ruin of the desk. My hip dug into his deltoid, my forearm pressed against his throat, just enough to restrict airflow, just enough to remind his lizard brain who was in charge. He roared, a sound trapped behind clenched teeth, vibrating directly into my chest. "If you move, I sever the aorta," I hissed, my face inches from his. Do you understand? You will bleed out in 3 seconds. Hold. Still. He froze. It wasn't a surrender, it was a suspension of physics. He held himself in a state of rigid, trembling tension that was more exhausting than movement. His eyes snapped open, locking onto mine. They were swimming with black veins, the corruption spreading faster now that I had agitated the source. But beneath the pain, beneath the black magic trying to hollow him out, there was that look again, that terrifying, burning focus. He wasn't looking at the ceiling. He was looking at me. He was memorizing the feel of my body pinning his down. "You are heavy," he wheezed, a bloody grin ghosting across his lips. "I'm dense," I corrected, adjusting my grip on the forceps without letting him up. "Muscular density is higher in extraction specialists. We have to carry dead weight often. Now breathe." He sucked in a breath. It rattled in his chest. I twisted the forceps. The shard moved. It didn't want to come. It was hooked into the muscle fibers like a barbed hook. I had to rip it free. The sound was wet, tearing, a noise that usually signals a career-ending mistake. Blood welled up, hot and dark, coating my gloved fingers. It soaked into the cuffs of my silk blouse. I ignored it. I ignored the way his sweat was transferring to my skin, making my shirt cling. I ignored the fact that our breathing had synced up, sharp, ragged inhalations in perfect unison. This was the intimacy of violence. It's a secret that surgeons and soldiers share. There is no barrier between two people when one is inside the other's body. I knew the rhythm of his heart better than his lovers did. I knew the exact tensile strength of his restraint. I could smell the ozone of his magic and the iron of his blood, a scent that was dizzying in the enclosed space. "Almost there," I whispered, more to myself than him. "Come on, you little parasite." I pulled. The resistance was immense. It felt like trying to pull a sword out of a stone, if the stone was screaming. Valerius's head fell back, his neck tendons straining like steel cables. He let out a low, keen sound, a sound of absolute vulnerability that he would have killed anyone else for hearing. "I have it," I said, the adrenaline spiking my own blood pressure. "I have the tip. Don't move, Valerius. Do not breathe." I braced my elbow against his ribcage for leverage. I could feel the heat of the shard through the steel of the instrument. It was burning hot, reacting to the proximity of the exit. It wanted to stay. It wanted to consume him. "Out," I commanded. I gave one final, decisive yank. The suction broke with a sickening squelch. For a microsecond, triumph washed over me. I had it. The tip of the black glass was visible, emerging from the ruin of his chest like a dark tooth. Then the world turned red. I was still holding my breath when the facility's external breach alarm tore through the room, turning my sterile focus into a tactical liability. The emergency lighting shifted from steady amber to a strobing, violent crimson. "Perimeter breach," a mechanical voice announced, cool and indifferent. "Sector 4, Sector 5, the throne room." Valerius's eyes snapped wide. The gold flared, burning away the black veins in an instant of pure, protective rage. "They're here," he snarled. The alarm shattered the sterile field. It killed the focus, the rhythm, and the fragile truce between patient and predator. Valerius moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a reflex honed by centuries of defending a throne everyone wanted to steal. He exploded upward. "No!" I shouted. I had a split second to choose. Hold the forceps and risk tearing his subclavian artery as he moved, or let go and lose the purchase I had fought for. I let go. The steel instrument clattered to the floor, bouncing once before sliding into a pool of red. "Valerius, stop!" I slammed my hands against his good shoulder, using my leverage to pin him back against the desk. It was like trying to hold back a tsunami with a traffic cone. He ignored me. He ignored the open wound in his chest. He ignored the fact that he was half naked and bleeding out. He swung his legs off the desk, his boots hitting the floor with a heavy, decisive thud. "My guard is breached," he snarled, his voice distorted by the shift rippling through his vocal cords. "Sector 4, the nursery. They are in the nursery." "And you are in cardiac distress," I countered, grabbing his arm. His skin was scorching hot, the fever spiking as his metabolism kicked into combat overdrive. If you shift, the expansion of your rib cage will drive that shard straight into your heart. You won't make it to the door. He turned on me. The gold in his eyes was blinding, swirling with a violence that made my knees instinctively want to buckle. A lesser woman would have backed down. A lesser doctor would have fled. I stepped into his space. I grabbed his face between my blood-slicked hands and forced him to look at me. "Look at me," I commanded, my voice dropping to that lethal, quiet register. "You hired me because I am the best. If you walk out that door right now, you are firing me. And I do not accept termination without a severance package." For a second, he hesitated. The wolf in him recognized the alpha in me. "They are killing my people," he whispered, the agony in his voice raw enough to strip paint. "And if you die, they all die," I said, relentless. "You are the anchor for the wards. If your heart stops, the shield falls. You have to stay alive to save them. That means you stay here." He looked at the door. The sounds of combat were getting louder, the distinct crump of magical impact, the scream of tearing metal. "I can't," he said. He pulled away from me. The movement tore the wound further. Fresh blood welled up, running down his sculpted abs in a dark, jagged river. But it wasn't the blood that terrified me. It was the shard. As his rage spiked, the black glass began to glow. It pulsed in time with his anger, feeding on the massive output of kinetic energy he was generating. The black veins that had been inching toward his heart suddenly surged. I watched, horrified, as the necrosis spread visibly, racing across his skin like ink dropped in water. "Valerius, look at your chest," I pointed. He looked down. The black lines had reached his sternum. They were curling around his nipple, turning the skin gray and dead. "It's feeding on the adrenaline," I explained, my mind racing through variables. "Every time you get angry, every time you try to fight, it digs deeper. It's a kinetic trap. The more you struggle, the faster it kills you." He stared at the corruption spreading across his own body. He clenched his fist, and the veins jumped. "Then remove it," he said, his eyes snapping back to mine. "Do it now, while I stand." "I can't extract it while you're a moving target," I shouted. "I need stillness. I need precision. I need you to not be a warrior for 5 damn minutes." Boom. The heavy blast doors of the sanctum shuddered. Someone was trying to batter them down from the outside. "We don't have 5 minutes," Valerius growled. He reached for a sword leaning against the wall, a massive, 2-handed slab of iron. He hefted it with one hand, muscles bunching. "We are leaving." "You can't fight," I insisted, blocking his path. "You swing that sword, you tear your own muscle. You die." "I'm not going to fight," he said, looking at me with terrifying clarity. "I'm going to get you out. You are a civilian. You are under my protection." "I am your doctor." "You are a liability if they breach this room," he corrected. "Move, Nessberry, or I will carry you." I looked at the door. The metal was beginning to glow orange in the center. I looked at the king. He was swaying, the shard glowing like a radioactive coal. He was right. We couldn't stay. The sterile field was gone. The extraction was botched. If we stayed, we died. But if he fought, he died. "Fine," I said, making a snap decision against every medical protocol in the book. I grabbed my medical bag, shoving the fallen forceps inside. "We move, but we move my way." "Your way?" he asked, wincing. "Tactical retreat," I said, grabbing his free arm and slinging it over my shoulder to support his weight. "There is a service corridor behind the tapestry. It leads to the panic room." "I don't hide," Valerius snarled. "You do today," I said, dragging him toward the back wall. "Because if you die, I don't get paid." I kicked the hidden release mechanism behind the heavy velvet tapestry. The ancient fabric, embroidered with the history of Valerius's ancestors slaughtering my ancestors, swung aside to reveal a dark, narrow service corridor. It smelled of damp stone, rat droppings, and neglect, a sharp contrast to the ozone-scented air of the war room we were fleeing. "Move," I ordered, ducking under Valerius's arm to take the brunt of his weight. He stumbled into the darkness, his boots scuffing loudly against the uneven flagstones. For a man who moved with the silent grace of a predator, The noise was a deafening admission of failure. He was heavy, dense muscle and heavy bone, wrapped in a fever that was quickly becoming a furnace. He leaned on me, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps that rattled in his chest. "You know, the way?" he wheezed, his voice tight with the effort of putting one foot in front of the other. "I memorized the architectural schematics of this fortress before I accepted the contract," I replied, adjusting my grip on his waist. His skin was burning through his dress shirt, soaking my silk blouse with his sweat. "I don't enter a kill box without knowing where the exit is, unlike some monarchs I know." "I didn't plan on getting stabbed," he gritted out. "Lack of foresight is a leadership failure," I countered, steering him around a sharp corner. "Watch your head, low clearance." We were moving too slowly. I could feel it. The corridor was narrow, designed for servants carrying trays, not for an extraction specialist dragging a dying king. Every step sent a jolt of pain through him that I could feel reverberating against my side. The void shard was reacting to the movement, vibrating like a tuning fork struck against a table. I glanced at his chest. The black veins were pulsing in time with his erratic heartbeat, creeping visibly toward his throat. "We need to stop," Valerius groaned, his legs buckling. He didn't wait for my permission. He slammed his shoulder into the rough stone wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the dirty floor, his head hanging between his knees. The movement tore a fresh cry of agony from his throat. "Get up," I hissed, checking the chronometer on my wrist. "We have 3 minutes before they breach the war room and realize the prize bird has flown the coop." "Go," he breathed, not looking up. "Leave me. I can hold the tunnel." I stared at him. He looked wrecked. The Alpha King, the scourge of the borderlands, was currently huddled in a service tunnel, clutching a sword he could barely lift, trying to be noble. It was infuriating. "I don't abandon half-finished work," I snapped, dropping to one knee in front of him. I jammed the needle into the deltoid, depressing the plunger. "This will feel cold." He shuddered as the icy liquid flooded the joint. "You enjoy stabbing me," he murmured, his head falling back against the stone wall. "I enjoy efficiency," I corrected, capping the syringe. "And you being conscious enough to walk is efficient." I waited 5 seconds. "Can you feel your shoulder?" He blinked, testing the muscle. "No, it's dead weight." "Good. That means you can move without screaming." I stood up and offered him a hand. "On your feet, Your Majesty. The carriage awaits." He lifted his head. His eyes were glassy, the gold dimming as the void magic consumed his energy reserves. "Nesbury, the shard, it's digging." "I know," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. I reached into my bag. "It's reacting to the pain signals. Your nervous system is screaming, and the shard is feeding on the noise. I need to mute the signal." I pulled out a preloaded syringe. It wasn't the general anesthetic he had forbidden. It was a localized nerve block, a cocktail of magical suppressants and lidocaine strong enough to numb a dragon's jaw. "Arm," I commanded. He tried to pull away. "No drugs. I said, no drugs." "This isn't for your head, Valerius. It's for your shoulder. If I don't numb the area, the mechanical action of walking is going to drive that shard into your lung before we reach the safe room. Do you want to drown in your own blood, or do you want to trust me?" He looked at the needle, then at me. The trust in his eyes was terrifying. It was absolute. He nodded, a jerky motion, and relaxed his arm. I didn't hesitate. I jammed the needle into the deltoid, depressing the plunger. "This will feel cold." He shuddered as the icy liquid flooded the joint. "You enjoy stabbing me," he murmured, his head falling back against the stone wall. "I enjoy efficiency," I corrected, capping the syringe. "And you being conscious enough to walk is efficient." I waited 5 seconds. "Can you feel your shoulder?" He blinked, testing the muscle. "No, it's dead weight." "Good. That means you can move without screaming." I stood up and offered him a hand. "On your feet, Your Majesty. The carriage awaits." He took my hand. His grip was still strong enough to crush bone, a reminder that even dying, he was dangerous. He hauled himself up, swaying as his center of gravity shifted. He was massive, looming over me in the cramped tunnel, a wall of heat and violence. "Lean on me," I ordered, stepping back under his good arm. We moved faster now. The block was working. He was moving mechanically, dragging the numb side of his body, but the agonizing hitches in his stride were gone. We navigated the labyrinth of the service tunnels, passing forgotten storage rooms and dust-covered portraits of long-dead kings. I kept one eye on the path and one on his vitals. His heart rate was erratic, spiking and dropping in a rhythm that suggested the shard was now interfering with the electrical impulses of the cardiac muscle. "Almost there," I whispered, spotting the heavy reinforced door at the end of the corridor. "It's not a panic room," Valerius corrected, his speech slurring slightly. "It's a strategic containment unit." "Whatever makes you feel better about hiding in a box," I said, reaching for the keypad. I punched in the override code I had stolen from the mainframe. The light turned green. The heavy hydraulic bolts retracted with a deep, satisfying thunk. I pushed the door open, revealing the small, sterile steel room beyond. "Inside," I said, shoving him gently. He stumbled across the threshold, collapsing against the far wall. I followed, slamming the door shut and spinning the manual locking wheel until it clicked. Valerius slid down the wall to the floor, his hand clutching his chest. I dropped my bag and knelt beside him, ripping the remains of his shirt open. "Damn it," I whispered. The black veins had reached his throat. The shard was no longer just threatening his heart. It was practically knocking on the door of the left ventricle. "Nesberry," he gasped, his hand gripping my wrist, his eyes wide and terrified. Not of death, but of failure. "Don't speak," I commanded, stripping off my ruined gloves and snapping on a fresh pair. "We are not done." The heavy steel bolts slammed home, sealing us inside a box designed to withstand a magical siege. The strategic containment unit was a polite euphemism for a 10 by 10 titanium cube buried in the foundation of the fortress. There were no windows, no exits, and the only light came from a single flickering emergency strip that cast long, sickly shadows against the brushed metal walls. Outside, the muffled thump, thump, thump of the rogue faction searching the corridors vibrated through the steel. Inside, the sound of Valerius's breathing was ragged and wet, filling the small space with the audio profile of a lung on the verge of collapse. "Sit," I ordered, dropping my bag onto the cold floor. "And don't argue. I don't have the patience for royal protocol right now." Valerius didn't argue. He couldn't. He slid down the wall, his legs sprawling out in front of him, taking up most of the available floor space. The nerve block in his shoulder had bought us mobility, but the cost was high. Without the pain to ground him, he had pushed his body past the red line. He looked gray, the kind of pallor that usually precedes a crash cart. I knelt beside him, my knees hitting the hard metal with a crack I barely felt. I ripped the remains of his dress shirt open, exposing the damage. "Damn it," I whispered, the curse slipping out before I could censor it. The run had been a mistake. A necessary mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. The vibration of his heavy footfalls, the torque of his muscles as he leaned on me, it had all acted as a catalyst. The void shard had migrated. It wasn't just deep anymore. It was critical. The black glass had twisted, angling itself downward, slipping past the pectoral muscle and pressing against the intercostal space. "Talk to me, Nesberry," Valerius rasped, his head lolling back against the steel wall. "Give me the data." "The data says you're an idiot for running on a perforated chest," I said, my voice tight. I pressed my fingers gently around the entry wound, gauging the heat. It was scorching. The corruption had spread, black veins now spiderwebbing up his neck, visible even in the dim emergency light. "The shard has moved 2 centimeters medial and 1 centimeter deep. It's nicking the pleura of your left lung. That bubbling sound when you breathe? That's air escaping into your chest cavity. You have a tension pneumothorax developing." "Fix it," he murmured, his eyes drifting shut. "Fix it?" I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "With what, Valerius? Look around. This isn't a sterile lab. It's a metal box. I have a portable kit, a few scalpels, and a roll of gauze. I don't have a retractor, I don't have suction. I don't have a team to hold you down when the pain overrides your logic. You have hands, he said, forcing his eyes open. The gold was dim, swimming in a haze of toxicity, but the focus was still there. You said you were the best. I am the best because I control the variables, I snapped, stripping off my ruined gloves and snapping on a fresh pair. This is chaos. If I cut you open here, on the floor, without stabilization, the shock alone could stop your heart. And even if you survive the extraction, the infection risk is nearly 100%. Better infected than dead, he countered. He tried to shift, to sit up straighter, but his body betrayed him. He slumped sideways, catching himself on his good arm. The movement made him gasp, a sharp intake of air that turned into a cough. Blood, dark and flecked with black magic, splattered onto his lips. Stop moving! I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him back against the wall. Every time you move, that shard digs deeper. It is literally millimeters from your pulmonary artery. If it nicks that, you bleed out in 90 seconds. Do you understand? You are a biological bomb, and the timer is broken. Then defuse me, he growled. The command was weak, but the intent was iron. Do it now, before they burn through the door. I looked at the door. The thumping outside had stopped, replaced by the high-pitched whine of a plasma cutter. They had found us. We had maybe 10 minutes before they breached the lock. 10 minutes to perform a surgery that usually took 4 hours. I looked back at Valerius. He was watching me, waiting. He wasn't afraid of the knife. He was afraid of dying without a fight. Fine, I said, the decision settling over me like a cold shroud. I opened my kit, laying the instruments out on the floor beside his leg. We do it your way. Dirty, fast, brutal. I picked up the number 10 scalpel. It looked pitifully small against the mass of his chest. I can't numb the area again, I told him, my voice dropping to that professional, detached register that kept my hands steady. I used the last of the block on your shoulder. You are going to feel everything. The incision, the spreaders, the extraction. It is going to feel like I am reaching into your chest and tearing your soul out. I can take it, he gritted out. I know you can take it, I said, moving between his spread legs, settling my weight on my heels. The problem isn't your pain tolerance, Valerius. It's your reflexes. When I touch that shard, your body is going to try to reject me. You are going to thrash. You are going to fight. And if you move while my hand is inside you, I will kill you. I leaned forward, placing the tip of the blade against the blackened skin over his heart. The air in the room was thick, heavy with his fever and the metallic tang of fresh blood. I need you to be a statue, I whispered, locking eyes with him. I need you to surrender control, completely. He stared up at me, the predator warring with the patient. You don't have the equipment to restrain me. I have steady hands and a knife, I countered, pressing the blade down until a bead of dark blood welled up. And I have your word. Hold still, I commanded. He looked at the blade, then at my lips. A ghost of a smirk touched his bloody mouth. Make me. Make me. It wasn't a flirtation. It was a biological imperative. His pupils were blown so wide, the gold was just a thin ring of fire around a black void. The toxicity was rewriting his threat assessment protocols. To him, I wasn't the doctor anymore. I was another obstacle between him and the door he felt compelled to defend. He tried to stand. The movement was jerky, uncoordinated, but powered by enough raw torque to throw a tank. I said, "Stay down," he growled. Not at me, but at the imaginary enemies his fever was conjuring in the corners of the room. He pushed off the wall, his boots sliding on the smooth steel floor. Valerius, you are hallucinating, I stated, stepping into his path. There is no one here but us. They are breaching, he insisted, his hand reaching for me, not to hurt, but to move me aside. I have to clear the line. He was a runaway train with a broken brake line. Logic wouldn't stop him. Compassion wouldn't stop him. Only physics would stop him. I don't have time for this, I muttered. I didn't shove him. Shoving an alpha is like shoving a mountain. It only annoys the geography. Instead, I used his own momentum against him. As he lunged forward, I stepped inside his guard. My hip hit his center of gravity, the fulcrum point. At the same time, I drove 2 fingers into the cluster of nerves just above his collarbone, right where the armor of his muscle was thinnest. It wasn't a strike. It was a system reset. His eyes rolled back. His legs, already compromised by the nerve block and the blood loss, simply ceased to receive instructions from his brain. He crumbled. I guided the fall, grabbing his tactical harness to ensure he didn't crack his skull against the floor. We went down together, a tangle of limbs and medical equipment. He hit the deck hard, the breath leaving his lungs in a sharp whoosh. Before he could reboot, before the wolf could scramble for purchase, I moved. I didn't just kneel beside him. That gave him too many angles of escape. I climbed over him. I planted one knee on either side of his hips, settling my full weight directly onto his lower torso. I straddled the King of the North. It wasn't romantic. It was tactical. By centering my mass over his diaphragm, I restricted his ability to take a full breath. By pinning his hips with my thighs, I neutralized his leverage. "You wanted me to make you?" I hissed, grabbing his wrists and pinning them to the floor above his head. "Consider it done." Valerius blinked, the shock of the impact momentarily clearing the haze from his gaze. He looked up at me. From this angle, I was looming over him, silhouetted against the flickering emergency light. My hair had come loose from its severe bun, framing my face in a halo of disarray that I would have found unprofessional if I wasn't currently wrestling a monarch. He tested his restraints. He flexed his wrists against my grip. Even dying, he was terrifyingly strong. If he really wanted to throw me off, he could. But he didn't. He stopped fighting. His hands relaxed in mine, the tension drained out of his frame, replaced by a sudden, intense stillness. "You are sitting on me," he wheezed, a slow, bloody smile spreading across his face. "I am applying kinetic stabilization," I corrected, leaning down until my face was inches from his, "because you refused to comply with verbal instructions. Now, are you going to stay down, or do I have to sedate you with a brick?" He laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest and straight into my own body where we were connected. The intimacy of the position was impossible to ignore. I could feel the fever heat radiating through his trousers, burning against my inner thighs. I could feel the rapid, thudding beat of his heart against my knees. "You have excellent bedside manner," he murmured, his eyes tracking the line in my throat. "Very hands-on." "I am trying to save your life, you stubborn, impossible creature," I said, my voice shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the sheer exertion of holding him down. "The shard is reacting to your aggression. If you fight me, you die. If you fight the door, you die. The only way you survive this is if you surrender." I tightened my grip on his wrists. "Yield, Valerius." The word hung in the silence between the heavy thuds of the battering ram outside. For an alpha, yielding is death. It goes against every instinct, every biological imperative written into their DNA. They dominate, they conquer, they do not submit. But Valerius looked at me. He looked at the sweat on my forehead, the blood on my blouse, the absolute, unyielding determination in my eyes. He saw the predator in me, the one that refused to let him go. And he liked it. The gold in his eyes softened, melting from the hard, cold metal of a shield into something warmer, something liquid and trusting. "Fine," he whispered, relaxing his head back against the cold steel floor. He opened his hands, interlacing his fingers with mine, turning the restraint into a caress. "I yield, Nessberry. I'm all yours." He exposed his throat, tilting his chin up, a gesture of ultimate trust. "Do your worst," he breathed. "Just don't stop touching me." "Don't worry," I said, releasing his hands to grab the scalpel from the floor, never breaking eye contact. "I'm just getting started." I didn't offer a countdown. Countdowns are for patients who have the luxury of anesthesia, sterile drapes, and a recovery room waiting with ice chips. We had none of that. We had a flickering light, a rapidly dwindling oxygen supply, and a piece of sentient glass trying to burrow into the king's left lung. "I need something for you to bite," I said, my voice tight. "If you scream, you'll tense the intercostal muscles. If you tense, the shard shifts. If it shifts, I lose my grip, and you drown in your own blood. Do you understand the mechanics?" Valerius nodded, a jerky, strained motion against the steel floor. His eyes were locked on mine, dark and fever-bright. He didn't look afraid. He looked ready to endure whatever violence I deemed necessary. I reached down to his waist. My fingers brushed the heated skin of his abdomen as I fumbled with the buckle of his belt. Under different circumstances, the intimacy of undressing a monarch in a locked room would have been a career highlight, or at least a very interesting footnote in my memoirs. Right now, it was just logistics. I pulled the heavy leather free from the loops with a sharp zip, the sound echoing in the small space. I folded the leather twice, making a thick gag. "Open," I commanded. He opened his mouth. I placed the leather between his teeth. "Bite down," I ordered, smoothing his hair back from his damp forehead with a hand that was already stained with his blood. "And don't let go until I tell you." He clamped down, his jaw muscles bunched, turning his face into a mask of grim determination. "Good boy," I whispered. I picked up the scalpel. The blade looked pitifully small against the ruin of his chest. The entry wound was a mess of blackened tissue and fresh, bright red arterial blood. The void shard had stopped glowing the moment he yielded, but I could still feel its hum, a low, sick vibration that made my teeth ache. "I'm going in," I said. "Deep breath." He inhaled. I cut. This wasn't the precise, clean incision of the first attempt. This was excavation. I had to reopen the wound and then go deeper, slicing through the fascia that had already begun to knit together with unnatural, magical speed. Valerius didn't move. He didn't thrash. But his entire body went rigid beneath me. A low, guttural sound tore from his throat, muffled by the leather, vibrating through his chest and directly into my own body, where I straddled him. My hands were slick. The blood was hot, slippery, and relentless. It coated the handle of the scalpel, making my grip precarious. I had to discard the blade. It was useless now. I needed tactile feedback. I shoved the instrument aside and plunged my gloved fingers directly into the wound. Valerius bucked. It was a reflex, a biological rejection of the intrusion. His hips jerked upward, slamming into mine. His hands flew up, grabbing my thighs, his fingers digging into my muscles with bruising force. "Stay with me," I shouted over the sound of his agony. "Don't you dare check out on me, Valerius. Look at me." He squeezed his eyes shut, his head thrashing against the metal floor. The veins in his neck stood out like cords. He was drowning in pain. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against his. My hair fell around us, creating a curtain that shut out the flickering lights and the sterile room. It was just us. My breath on his face, my hands inside his chest. "Open your eyes," I commanded, my voice dropping to that low, compelling register that bypassed the panic center of the brain. "Look at me, Valerius. Focus on the data. Focus on my voice." Slowly, agonizingly, his eyes cracked open. The gold was dull, swimming in tears he refused to shed, but he found me. He locked onto my gaze like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "That's it," I murmured, moving my fingers deeper, feeling past the slippery muscle, past the thudding rib cage. "I'm almost there. I can feel the heat. It's right against the pleura." He whined, a high, broken sound that shattered my heart, but I forced my hand to be steady. I was the Iron Doctor. I didn't get to have feelings. I only got to have results. My fingertip brushed something hard and cold. "Got you," I hissed. The shard recoiled. It pulsed, sending a shockwave of necrotic magic up my arm that numbed my fingers. I ignored it. I hooked my index finger around the jagged top of the glass. It was slippery, coated in blood and dark magic, fighting me like a living thing. "I need leverage," I gasped, sweat stinging my eyes. "Valerius, I need you to arch your back. Push your chest into my hand. Now!" He obeyed. With a groan that sounded like tectonic plates shifting, he engaged his core and arched his spine, thrusting his chest upward. It gave me the millimeter of space I needed. I got a grip, a solid 2-finger hold on the base of the parasite. On 3, I said, bracing my other hand against his shoulder. 1, 2. I didn't say 3. I pulled. I put my entire back into it. I leveraged my weight, my strength, and my sheer refusal to lose against the resistance of the magic. Squelch. The sound was wet and sickening, like a boot being pulled out of deep mud. Valerius screamed into the leather belt, his body bowing off the floor, every muscle seizing in a titanic contraction. And then, suddenly, it was free. My hand flew back, clutching a 3-inch spike of jagged obsidian glass. It was smoking, dripping with black ichor and bright red blood. I flung it across the room. It hit the far wall with a metallic ping and shattered into harmless dust. "It's out," I gasped, collapsing forward onto his chest. "It's out, Valerius. It's gone." Beneath me, the king went limp. The tension drained out of him instantly, leaving him boneless and trembling. He spat the belt out. It landed on the floor, chewed nearly in half. "Nesbury," he croaked, his voice wrecked. "I'm here," I whispered, pressing my hand over the wound to apply pressure. "I've got you. The bleeding is slowing. The black veins are receding. You did it." He lifted a shaking hand, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. His fingers left a streak of blood on my cheek. He looked at me with a mixture of exhaustion and absolute terrifying adoration. "We did it," he corrected. For a moment, there was silence. Just the sound of our ragged breathing and the hum of the ventilation system. The crisis was over. The adrenaline crash was waiting in the wings, ready to drop us both into shock. Then the smell hit me. Not blood, not ozone, burning metal. I lifted my head. The heavy steel door of the panic room, the one designed to withstand a siege, was glowing cherry red in the center. A single bright point of white heat appeared in the middle of the steel. Hiss. The metal began to bubble. It dripped onto the floor like wax. "Valerius," I said, my voice flat. "I see it," he rasped, trying to sit up. The white spot widened. Someone wasn't knocking. They were melting the door. I scrambled back, placing myself between the king and the glowing white heat of the breach, just as the steel gave way. The steel didn't just fail, it surrendered. The center of the blast door turned from cherry red to blinding white, and then, with a wet, tearing sound that defied the properties of metallurgy, it sloughed inward. Molten droplets hit the floor, hissing like angry snakes. I scrambled backward, my boots finding purchase on the slick floor, putting myself between the breach and the king. It was a reflex, not a strategy. Tactically, I was a woman armed with a 3-inch blade facing a breach team equipped with plasma cutters and assault rifles. "Stay down," I hissed over my shoulder. Valerius was still on the floor, breathless, his chest a ruin of fresh sutures and blood. He didn't answer. The door collapsed. Acrid smoke from the plasma cutter billowed into the small room. Through the haze, 3 figures emerged. They were massive, clad in black tactical gear that had been shredded in places to accommodate the shifting muscle mass beneath. Rogue shifters. Their eyes glowed with the telltale red of adrenaline stimulants. They didn't pause to assess. They saw the blood on the floor, the woman with the scalpel, and the king slumped against the wall. "Target acquired," the lead rogue growled, his voice distorted by a modulator. He raised a heavy pulse rifle, leveling it at my center of mass. I gripped the scalpel. It was laughable. I was bringing a knife to a gunfight, and it wasn't even a combat knife. It was designed to cut skin, not Kevlar. "Step away from the asset," the rogue commanded. "The asset is under medical quarantine," I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "If you fire that weapon in this enclosed space, the ricochet will kill us all. Do the math." He didn't do the math. He tightened his finger on the trigger. I braced myself for the impact. I calculated the trajectory. I prepared to die for a paycheck. Then the air in the room changed. The temperature spiked. The acrid smoke from the plasma cutter vanished, replaced instantly by the crackling static of raw, unadulterated, magical power. Behind me, Valerius didn't groan. He didn't struggle to rise. He simply stood up. The movement was silent. 1 second he was a casualty, the next he was a looming shadow behind my right shoulder. The heat radiating from him was no longer the sickly warmth of infection. It was the scorching, controlled burn of a nuclear reactor coming online. "Drop," Valerius said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command, spoken with the absolute, crushing weight of the crown. The lead rogue flinched. His eyes shifted from me to the figure towering over me. He saw the blood on Valerius's chest, the raw incision, the sweat, and he made the fatal mistake of assuming weakness. "Fire!" the rogue screamed. I dropped. I didn't wait to see if Valerius would follow. I hit the deck, covering my head. The gun went off. Thump, thump, thump. But the bullets never hit the wall. There was a sound like a thunderclap inside a jar. I looked up. Valerius hadn't moved. He had simply raised a hand. The air in front of us rippled, a translucent barrier of golden force catching the rounds in midair. They hung there, spinning harmlessly, suspended in his will. "My turn," Valerius murmured. He clenched his fist. The bullets dissolved into dust. Then he moved. He blurred. He bypassed me completely, closing the distance to the lead rogue in a time frame that the human eye couldn't track. He didn't use a weapon. He grabbed the barrel of the pulse rifle with one hand and the rogue's throat with the other. Crunch. He crushed the rifle like a soda can. In the same motion, he lifted the 300-pound shifter off the ground and slammed him into the steel wall. The impact dented the titanium. The rogue went limp instantly, his cervical spine severed with surgical precision. Efficiency rating, 100%. The other two rogues roared, dropping their guns and shifting. Their bodies contorted, fur bursting through tactical gear, claws lengthening into daggers. They lunged. Valerius didn't shift. He didn't need to. He spun, catching the second attacker by the tactical vest. He used the rogue's own momentum, pivoting on his heel and hurling the wolf across the room. The attacker hit the third rogue, knocking them both into a tangle of limbs and fur. Before they could recover, Valerius was on them. He didn't fight like a brawler. He fought like an algorithm. Every strike was calculated to end the conflict. He drove a knee into the second rogue's solar plexus, collapsing his diaphragm. As the wolf gasped, Valerius delivered a chopped blow to the temple that shut down the neural pathways instantly. 2 down. 4 seconds elapsed. The third rogue scrambled back, eyes wide with the realization that their intel was catastrophically wrong. He tried to raise a sidearm. Valerius stepped on his wrist. The bones snapped with a dry pop. The rogue screamed. "Quiet," Valerius growled. He reached down, grabbed the rogue by the tactical harness, and threw him out through the melted hole in the door. The body hit the corridor wall outside with a wet thud and slid down into silence. Valerius stood alone in the center of the room. He was panting slightly, his chest heaving. The fresh sutures I had just placed were holding, miraculously, though blood was seeping through the bandages. He flexed his hands, shaking the debris from his knuckles. The room was silent, save for the hum of the emergency lights and the settling dust. I stayed on the floor for a moment, just watching him. He was a perfect machine. The Void Shard had been a governor on an engine that was designed to run at redline. Now that it was gone, he wasn't just recovering, he was evolving. He turned slowly. The golden shield faded, but the light in his eyes didn't. He looked at the bodies, verified the threat was neutralized, and then his gaze locked onto me. The silence that followed the violence was heavy, possessing a physical weight that pressed against my eardrums. It was the vacuum left behind when a hurricane suddenly decides to change course. The air in the containment unit was thick with the metallic tang of blood, the sharp bite of scorched metal from the melted door, and the undeniable musk-heavy pheromones of an alpha who had just engaged in lethal combat. King Valerius stood amidst the wreckage of his enemies, like a statue carved from ruin and resolve. His chest was heaving. each breath a ragged testament to the fact that his lung was likely recollapsing, but he didn't seem to notice. Blood, dark, viscous, and dangerously plentiful, slicked his torso, soaking the bandages I had applied only minutes ago. He was a mess. He was a biological disaster. He was also the most devastatingly competent thing I had ever seen. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the movement. My silk blouse was ruined, stiff with dried blood that wasn't mine, and my hair had fully escaped its pins, falling around my face in a chaotic curtain. I must have looked like a survivor of a natural disaster. Valerius turned. The movement was fluid, lacking the jagged hesitation of pain that should have been crippling him. His eyes locked onto mine. The gold irises were burning, luminous in the dim emergency light, swirling with a mixture of leftover combat aggression and something else, something far more dangerous to my professional detachment. He didn't look at me like a patient. He looked at me like a prize he had just won in a blood sport. I didn't back down. I didn't flinch. I am Dr. Nessberry, and I do not cower before biological variables, even when they are 6'5" and looking at me like I am the only source of oxygen in the room. I stepped over the twisted body of the rogue shifter, my boots crunching on broken glass, and closed the distance between us. "Status report," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse was hammering a frantic rhythm against the collar of my shirt. "You engaged in high-velocity combat immediately following thoracic surgery. Your stitches have likely dehisced. Your blood pressure is undoubtedly stroke level." Valerius didn't answer. He watched me approach, his head tilting slightly to the side, tracking my movement with a predatory focus that made the fine hair on my arms stand up. I stopped inches from him. The heat radiating off his skin was intense, a fever spike fueled by the adrenaline dump. I reached into my pocket, miraculously still holding my penlight, and clicked it on. "Look at me," I commanded, raising the light to his eyes. He obeyed, not because he respected the medicine, but because he wanted to look at me. I swept the beam across his vision. "Pupils are blown," I muttered, analyzing the lack of constriction. "Dilated to 8 millimeters. Non-reactive. You are high on your own supply, Your Majesty. Adrenaline overdose. Your system is flooded with enough cortisol to kill a horse." "I feel fine," he rasped. The voice was rough, like gravel grinding in a mixer. "You feel fine because your brain has shut down pain reception to keep you fighting," I corrected, snapping the light off and shoving it back into my pocket. I reached out, placing my hand flat against his sternum, right over the blood-soaked bandage. His heart was beating so hard it felt like it was trying to bruise my palm. In approximately 90 seconds, that chemical cocktail is going to wear off. And when it does, gravity is going to win. He smirked. It was a bloody, arrogant, beautiful expression. "You think I'll fall?" "I think you are a biological organism subject to the laws of physics," I said, my tone crisp. "Sit down, Valerius, before you fall down." He looked at me for a long beat. The gold in his eyes flared one last time, bright and defiant. And then, as if my words had cut the puppet strings holding him up, the crash hit. His knees buckled. I moved instantly. I wasn't strong enough to catch him. Catching 300 pounds of dead weight is a good way to slip a disc. But I could guide the descent. I grabbed his arm, steering him away from the sharp edges of the melted door and toward the wall. He hit the steel with a heavy thud and slid down, his legs sprawling out in front of him. A groan tore from his throat, low and pained, as the adrenaline receded and the reality of a 3-inch incision in his chest made itself known. "There it is," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "Welcome back to mortality." He laughed. It was a wet, wheezing sound that turned into a cough. He winced, clutching his side, but he didn't stop looking at me. He reached out, his hand trembling, and grabbed the lapel of my ruined coat. He pulled. I didn't resist. I let him pull me down until I was sitting on the floor beside him, my shoulder pressed against his arm. "You stayed," he breathed, his head falling back against the wall, his eyes slipping shut. "I haven't been paid yet," I lied, my voice soft. I reached over, checking the pulse at his neck. It was thready, but steadying. "And I don't leave a job half finished." Liar, he murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. You stayed because you like me. I like your anatomy, I corrected, adjusting the bandage on his chest to staunch the fresh bleeding. You have excellent vascular structure. It would be a shame to waste it. He hummed, a vibration that traveled through his shoulder and into mine. The tension in the room began to bleed away, replaced by a strange, exhausted intimacy. We were two professionals, sitting in a metal box, surrounded by bodies, covered in fluids that weren't ours, alive only because we were too stubborn to die. It was the most romantic moment of my life. Then, the heavy thud of boots echoed in the corridor outside. Lots of boots. The rhythmic, disciplined march of the Royal Guard. "Sire," a voice shouted from the hallway. "Clear the sector! Breach team, move in!" Valerius opened one eye. The predator was gone, replaced by the king. He squeezed my hand, his grip weak but possessive. "Showtime," he whispered. "Try to look professional." "I always look professional," I said, wiping a smear of his blood from my cheek. "You're the one who isn't wearing a shirt." 24 hours is a long time in politics. In medicine, it is a single rotation of the observation clock. The Royal Medical Wing was aggressively white, designed to project a purity that had been entirely absent from the panic room yesterday. I snapped the latch on my Pelican case. Click. The sound was final. Inside, the foam inserts cradled my instruments, cleaned, autoclaved, and accounted for. Even the forceps I had used to extract a piece of sentient dark magic from a monarch's chest were back in their slot. "Invoice sent," I muttered, tapping the tablet. The sum was astronomical. It included hazard pay, overtime, and a replacement fee for a silk blouse currently sitting in a biohazard incinerator. I was done. The patient was stable. I was walking away. The door slid open on silent magnetic rails. King Valerius stepped inside. He wasn't wearing the tactical gear. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than my medical degree. The tailoring was impeccable, hiding the heavy bandaging wrapped around his torso. He moved with a stiff, deliberate grace, favoring his left side just enough to tell a trained eye he was hurting, but hiding it well enough to fool his court. "You're packing," he stated. It was an accusation. "I am discharged," I corrected, not looking up. "And so are you. I reviewed your charts. Your healing factor is accelerating. You don't need a surgeon. You need a nap and iron supplements." "I need a consultant," he countered. The air pressure changed. It always did when he got too close. He stopped at the edge of the desk. He placed a hand on the surface, his right hand. "I received your invoice," he said. "I accept wire transfers," I replied, finally looking up. He looked at me. The gold in his eyes was calm today, molten honey instead of a forest fire. But the intensity hadn't dialed down. It had focused. "I'm not paying it," he said softly. I froze. "Excuse me? I saved your life. If you're negotiating a discount because I had to physically assault you to do it, read the fine print. Clause 4. Use of necessary force to ensure survival is billable." "I'm not paying it," he repeated, a slow smile spreading, "because I am rejecting the termination of the contract." The contract was for a single extraction. The object is extracted. The contract is fulfilled. "That was a specific scope of work," he said, sounding like a lawyer about to ruin my life. "I'm interested in a retainer." "I don't do retainers. I do crisis management. You are no longer in crisis." "Aren't I?" He stepped around the desk. I didn't back up. He stopped inches from me, invading my personal space with the arrogance of a man who owns everything he sees. "My security was breached," he listed. "My medical team was compromised. And the only reason I am standing here instead of lying in a state funeral is because you refused to let me die." I was doing my job. "You were doing more," he whispered. He reached out, covering my hand on the case handle. His skin was warm. "You took command. You neutralized threats. And I have realized something, Nessberry. I have a critical vulnerability." "The silver allergy?" "No," he said, locking onto my eyes. "Competence. I find myself dangerously addicted to it." My breath hitched. He was using corporate terminology to tell me he was obsessed. He was framing a mating dance as a personnel acquisition. "You want to hire me," I said slowly. "I want to secure the asset, exclusively." "That sounds expensive." "Triple the invoice," he challenged. "I don't care about the gold. I care that when the world was ending, you were the only thing that made sense." He leaned closer. I could smell him, clean soap and the underlying scent of cedar. "I am offering you a new position," he murmured. "Head of Royal Security and Medical Protocol. You run my life, Nessberry, because clearly I am incapable of doing it without getting stabbed." "And the scope of work?" I asked. "Does it include wrestling you on the floor every Tuesday?" "Only if I'm lucky," he smirked. I drafted a new agreement. He pulled a heavy, cream-colored document from his pocket. I took it, my fingers brushing his chest. He wasn't as calm as he looked. His heart was hammering. I scanned the legalese until I hit the duties section. Clause 3. The king reserves the right to seduce the consultant during non-combat hours. I choked. "Clause 3 is non-negotiable," he said, his voice thick with heat. "This isn't a contract," I said. "This is a proposition." "It's both," he admitted, stepping closer until his legs brushed mine. "I'm a multitasker. Why hire a doctor and a queen separately when I can have both in one terrifyingly competent package?" "I haven't agreed to be queen," I pointed out. "Not yet," he whispered, "but the negotiation is just beginning." "Clause 3 is non-negotiable," he said, his voice thick with heat. I looked at the paper again. Clause 3. Exclusive rights to the biological entity known as King Valerius. "This is a marriage license," I stated flatly, tapping the document with my index finger. "Disguised as a vendor agreement. It's manipulative, coercive, and legally binding in 3 dimensions." "I know my audience," he smirked, stepping into my personal space. He effectively caged me against the heavy mahogany desk. The air between us wasn't just charged, it was pressurized. Heavy with the scent of cedar, expensive scotch, and the raw, magnetic pull of an alpha who had decided he was done waiting. "Read the addendum," he commanded, his voice dropping to that low, vibrating register that bypassed my logical centers and went straight to my knees. I looked down. It was absurd. It was brilliant. Subsection 4.A. The consultant retains full veto power over all tactical decisions involving the king's physical safety. Subsection 4B. The king retains full rights to distract the consultant during administrative duties. This isn't standard boilerplate, I noted, tracing the heavy cream paper with a finger that was, for once, not covered in latex. "You're signing away your autonomy, Valerius. You're giving me command authority over the crown." "I'm giving you command authority over the man," he corrected, leaning down until his nose brushed the shell of my ear. "The crown is just an accessory. You want the wolf, and the wolf wants you to sign the damn paper." He was right. I did. He wasn't just a client anymore. He was the variable I couldn't control, and for the first time in my career, I didn't want to fix the anomaly. I wanted to study it, up close. But I wasn't going to make it easy. "I am Dr. Nessberry. I don't sign anything without redlining it first." "There's a typo in paragraph 5, I said, pulling a pen from my pocket. "You spelled eternal with 2 L's. It looks desperate." "I am desperate," he admitted, capturing my hand before I could make the correction. His thumb traced the sensitive skin of my wrist, right over my pulse point, which was currently betraying me by hammering at 120 beats per minute. "I have a 3-inch incision in my chest, a kingdom in rebellion, and a mate who refuses to acknowledge the bond unless it's notarized." I looked up. The gold in his eyes was consuming. It wasn't the fever anymore. It was clarity. "Is that what this is?" I asked softly. "A mating bond?" "It's a retention agreement," he murmured, pressing my hand against his heart. It was beating strong, steady, and entirely for me. "I'm retaining you. Permanently. No exit clause, no severance package, just us, until the stars burn out." I clicked the pen. The sound was loud in the quiet office. "Acceptable terms," I whispered. I signed my name. The ink was barely dry before he swept the papers onto the floor. "Now," he growled, hoisting me onto the edge of the desk, settling between my knees with a familiarity that made my breath hitch. "About that physical exam." "I need to check your stitches," I said, trying to maintain a shred of professional decorum as his hands found my waist. "You exerted yourself during the breach. There could be tearing." "Check them," he challenged, guiding my hands to his shirt buttons. "But be warned, doctor, my pain tolerance has returned to normal." "Good," I said, undoing the first button. I slid my hand inside, feeling the heat of his skin, the ridge of the bandage, and the hard muscle beneath. Because my bedside manner hasn't improved. He leaned in, his lips hovering millimeters from mine. "Make me care." The heavy oak door clicked shut, the lock engaging with a final, decisive thud. A "Do Not Disturb" sign, written in the king's own heavy hand, swung gently from the handle. In the end, power isn't about who sits on the throne. It's about who keeps the king's heart beating. If you want to see the addendum to that contract, subscribe to the Inner Circle.